So happy to be here tonight. Happy to be here for Ladies' Night. My name is Melissa Ryan. A little bit of background about myself. I will warn you, you now have a compliance person / auditor in your midst. I know. I was kind of scared, but I was told you would all be friendly for the evening. So, out of curiosity, anyone else willing to admit or self-identify any experience in that area? A few hands. I love it. Friends, family, people you might talk to that you don't absolutely despise in that area? Not a lot of hands. All right, well, I'm in a friendly crowd tonight. So, I'm told, very technical group, absolutely makes sense. My presentation is not overly technical. I'm here to share a little bit of perspective from my role, my various roles, my background and experience. Hoping that helps you a bit in your role and position. Please, happy to take questions, banter back and forth as we go. Pretty fluid, relaxed. Seems like that's this type of crowd, so we're good. My background, I spent a little over a decade in public accounting. I know I'm making real points here with everyone, but in public accounting, working in the risk advisory, compliance audit, some security and IT related services. After that, went to a legal processing service provider here in Kansas City, a global company, was responsible for building their audit department, then partnered with our security team, our legal team, built a compliance team, and put together an integrated governance and assurance model that's the basis for some of what I'll share tonight. Some of it's from what I've seen at other clients and organizations as well, but wanting to share that. So goals are up here. Hopefully you take away just a couple of tidbits of a different perspective, a new way to look at things, as well as some ideas, questions, things you could take tomorrow to either give your auditors or compliance folks a hard time. That's always a good thing, right? Or something you can use. So when we talk about collaborative governance, I'm not going to do a lot of definitions, but did want to level set on when I speak of governance, what am I talking about? So these are some of the characteristics and structures that we look for in a standard governance model. Hopefully nothing terribly surprising here, but we do this to grow the business, to secure the business, to protect the data, to make sure that things are operating as they should be, so that we can make the money, protect the data, grow, personal growth, business growth. A lot of good things come from structuring this in the right way. So here's where we come to the audience participation part of the evening. When we talk about collaborative governance, these are some of the teams that I'm talking about. So it's folks in my role, audit, compliance, risk, privacy, folks in the security role, folks in the legal role, IT management. It truly is collaborative across all of these functions, but certain functions and roles have additional responsibilities. So first we're gonna have a little fun with stereotypes and some of those first things you think of when you hear some of these teams, some of these roles in your organization. So the first one I want to start with is internal audit. Tell me some of the words that come to mind. Word association game.
Pain.
Pain. It's a good one to start. Come on, you guys are not shy. Meetings. Yep. Auditors like meetings.
Non-compliance.
Non-compliance.
We got one.
They like saying no.
They like saying no. They make up findings. That's a good one.
Excel.
Thank you, John. What was that one? Documentation. You guys are good. So here was a list I had. A lot of people, all of what you said, true, and I've heard that many years. Nothing hurts my feelings anymore. Accountants, audit police. They don't really understand operations. How are they going to come in here and tell me what I'm doing or check what I'm doing? They've never done it before. We have no humor. As I have proven wrong tonight, I do shots. Auditors, friendly people, do shots. We enjoy a good time too. Made up findings, gotchas. You're back again. We're having another meeting and you have another Excel checklist. So pretty on target there for internal audit, right? Similar, but sometimes different. Tell me about your compliance teams, your privacy teams. Any experiences there? Similar to audit, right? Any differences? All right. I'll give you some answers on this one, but you're going to have to participate in the next one. Very similar. Been referred to as the Business Prevention Department. That's always fun. They're control freaks. They have checklists. They come in with these crazy lists and frameworks, and who wants to pay attention to that?
We put the no in innovation.
They put the no in innovation. That's nice. Very nice. All right, so now how about yourselves? What do we say about security? Woo! Well, okay. Come on. I can throw them out, but you know them. Department of No. I actually don't have that on my list. I might have to add that.
Yeah.
We're not happy till you're not happy. What a slogan. I want to come work with you. Woo. Nerds. Tech geeks. Man, you guys were all over internal auditors and nothing else. All right. So this is what we say about you behind your backs, in case you didn't know. Antisocial, inflexible, doomsday.
Yeah.
They always speak fun. Oh, they're IT people. That's a favorite, right? I know. And they do stuff. Don't worry about me. I'm doing stuff. I'm good, right? So just to play, a little fun with the different stereotypes. But these are our teams, right? These are the folks back to the original pieces that we talked about. And we're truly aligned with some common goals. If you step back from, I'm doing my piece, you're doing your piece, when we think about what we're trying to do for the business, there are definitely some common goals. We're aligned in certain ways. Ideally, we're working together collaboratively to move the ball down the court in the same direction. So security takes a certain strategy around securing the data, protecting the assets, whether they're the company assets, client data, our employees, physically, and the information we're keeping about them, right? So they strategize around how to protect, how to prevent anything getting out, how to make sure the right people have the access. Your audit and your compliance teams are similarly engaged in the same goal. They're wanting to come in and help in many ways, check, monitor, and report that hopefully you all are doing what you need to be doing. And everyone wants that good report going up. Or on the flip side, and we'll get into some of this a little bit later on, like ideas and things to take back and questions. If there's gaps that you know of and are having problems getting the funding, resources, attention, leverage those teams as part of those assessments and getting the attention that you need. So there's common goals if you approach it in that way. Again, growing the business, aligning for new growth, new markets, new products, whatever that might be. So even though we have the stereotypes, we jest at each other, we have a lot of fun doing that, hopefully. And sometimes there is, there's tension in that, right? Hopefully healthy, sometimes more than. But ideally, aligned by common goals, moving in the same direction. So as we were building an integrated model across security, risk, compliance, privacy for a global organization, we spent some time talking with different companies, different professional organizations around how are companies doing this, how are they structuring it, who's responsible for what, who's involved. And the one thing we came away with is there's no one right way to do it. Found some wrong ways. I'm sure you all have experienced some challenges in your organization around working together, different structures, things that just plain didn't work. But we did find that there's no one right way to do it. A question that we kept coming back to, and I think it's just a good discussion point to continue, and we still do, is this the chicken and egg question? Does security drive or does compliance drive? Who's strategizing around how we're doing some of those common goals that we're aligned with? So these are not questions necessarily to be answered tonight, but things that you can take back to your companies, your organizations, your teams, and begin to think, who is driving my organization? How do I leverage that or change that, depending on your perspective of whether it's working or right? But who and what drives the security strategy and how you're approaching that from a process, a technology, and implementation perspective? Who's leading that charge? Who's reporting to executives? Who's reporting to the board? Who's identifying those problems and reporting them up and getting things prioritized? And how do you get into that chain? How do you get into that communication channel? How do you get into that budgeting process? Because everything comes down to the resources, right? What type of reporting is in place and how can you leverage that? Is that your compliance team? Is that your audit team? If your audit or compliance team hasn't come to visit you as a security function recently, honestly, go wave a flag and get them focused where they need to be in many ways. Sometimes there are components that come down from a compliance standpoint when regulations change. So there may be drivers coming into your organization and your team from many different places, from compliance, from your clients, new products, new markets, new changes, business growth, technology changes. But thinking about where do different components come from, where does the information flow, and how do you get into that channel and feed to get accomplished what you need to get accomplished and no needs to get accomplished for your organization. So this is a comment that's been shared by a colleague. As an audit and compliance person, I'm reminded often, if we get the security right, the compliance pieces will just fall. You can get to your Excel spreadsheet, you can go document, and we'll be set. So I'm curious as to this group's perspective on that. Thus the thoughts.
Good plan.
Somebody raise your hand and I'll come bring the mic to you.
Thank you, Julie. I heard a comment over here. Good plan?
Good plan.
Good plan. Any opposing voices? Or comment? You raised your hand at the same time I asked.
Well, I hope nobody beats me up after saying this, but I would think that maybe compliance drives security because the different compliance requirements out there, regulations and other organizations. So you have to build your security around the compliance. Drive how you prioritize it.
Okay. Who else? Oh, thank you.
Wait louder.
I think I think compliance aims at security, but it's slow and reactive. It doesn't stay current with it. Its goal is to get you in security, but they're overlapping Venn diagrams, but not concentric circles.
Fair, good visual. Other thoughts, perspectives?
This group is wall-to-wall opinions. You guys are awfully quiet.
You aren't being audited, I promise.
We got another one.
It's because the FBI lady is here somewhere.
Yeah.
I honestly think that it depends on how proactive or reactive your security team is or what's been required of the compliance team to come into play. It's a push and pull. I've been on both sides.
It's a chicken and an egg conundrum.
Oh.
The chicken eats the egg.
Compliance can also imply a finish line, in where we've crossed the finish line, we're compliant, we're done, and security doesn't really work that way.
All right, so I appreciate those perspectives. I think that gives a good example of it could go either way. It's circumstantial. We love an it depends answer, right? I really like the last comment around security is fluid. Compliance also needs to be fluid and keep up, but sometimes those functions, and this is organization dependent as well, move at different speeds, different paces, might be required to because of the roles, functions, and different challenges that they're facing, right? So again, coming back to the purpose is collaborative governance. If those two teams are working towards the same thing, in the same direction, collaborating on the requirements from a compliance perspective, because if we have regulatory compliance requirements, it's not an option. We do have to follow those and align security with them. However, that may not address everything that needs to be addressed for the organization. That compliance requirement is only for a certain scope, certain component of the business, certain type of data. There's probably multiple security components across the different compliance frameworks that apply, but it's never going to be a one-size-fits-all. So I tend to lead towards the security driving in this case, but needing to pull in both of the components. To get that to be right, the scope has to be right. So this is I'll answer the second question on here for you. It needs to consider all the right aspects and dynamics. Can't be focused on just one component of security, the technical aspects. It needs to consider the people, the process, everything up through background checks and getting the right folks in to manage the pieces. So it's truly an end-to-end piece. And if security is brought together in that vein and with that perspective, it truly does get the organization a long way towards your compliance, your right risk management, your audit requirements, and answer some of those questions. So one more. Compliance frameworks are the language in which business interprets and communicates security. What are your thoughts on this? True? False?
True. Yeah.
I hear true. Any no's? We're all in agreement? I'm right, move on. So in many cases, we have seen that not everyone fully understands the ins and outs of security and all of the detailed requirements, the technical components, the processes, the operations, the monitoring, the risk, everything that goes into that. The compliance frameworks, what they do have in value is providing that translation layer, if you will. In many cases, translating into common terminology, standard set of expectations that allow companies to compare against competitors, other entities, to prove to regulators, because again, many cases we are required to do the things that we're doing, right? To prove that we are evidence that. So there is value in having those frameworks, but it's striking the balance between where do we use them, how do we leverage them, where do they fit in the organization. So when we talk about collaboration points across these teams, together is better, simply the motto. Knowing your business and leveraging those teams to help identify changes, track information. A lot of times I've talked with security teams or other teams in the organization who feel they aren't necessarily informed as to what's happening in the business, what's changing, where are we going, what's our direction. You're bringing on new systems, you're making changes to systems, you're bringing on new assets that I don't know they exist, and new locations I didn't know we were opening. So not being in that information flow is often a challenge, and you can't do the job you are hired to do, the things you need to do to go back to secure and protect. So leverage those other teams, those other governance teams for the information, the updates, the trigger points that cause you to reassess, change strategy, modify approach, and back and forth. The information sharing is truly a key point in the collaboration. The assets and scoping, also an interesting point. And this is definitely an area where I would recommend you work iteratively and collaboratively with your audit and your compliance teams as security professionals, identifying where are the riskiest points. What are the true assets we're trying to protect? Where are they sitting? What's the status right now of the security structure around them? Where are our risk points? Oftentimes, you know those insights better than the other teams. It comes back to the information sharing, making sure folks are focused on the right areas and not on something that did happen to come up on a checklist or a compliance framework. Make sure that we're in agreement on where the value is, what the important assets are, where the risk points are, and where we need to be focusing our collaborative efforts. On the leverage points, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier on, coordinated reporting. Your auditor comes in, hopefully they're not making up all of the findings that they found, and some of them are actually legit, real and true things that need to be fixed in the organization. Make sure they're getting it right, obviously, but then get on board with getting those fixed. I've been in board level reporting before where we've collaboratively organized with the CIO, all agreed on the issues, and presented it as the perfect opportunity for this executive to say, I need the resources, I need new tools, here's what I need to address these true risks of the organization. We presented in that fashion, and he says, I'm good. This was your opportunity to say, yeah, you're right, this is a problem, I need that. Here's how I fix it, and here's what I need. So going to coordinated, collaborative communicate up front, make sure everyone's in the know, no surprises. But just an example of where that could have been leveraged way more fully. So one real life example, who in here has heard of GDPR? Few hands, awesome, love it. So this is an EU-based regulation that becomes effective in May of 2018. If your organization stores, processes, handles any data for EU citizens, any of their personally identifiable information, and your organization has not started doing something to comply with this regulation, you are way behind. It is a regulation that, even though it's based in the EU, it applies globally because it applies to EU citizen personal data wherever it lives, including here in the middle of the US. So just some basics on there, just for a little bit of background for those who are not necessarily familiar with this. It's kind of a perfect storm. There's components of it that address data security. There's components of it that address typical privacy considerations, notice, consent. There's pieces of it that require governance and regulatory oversight at a level that many have never seen. Question?
How will that affect if Brexit succeeds? How will that affect? Will they still be covered?
The question is, how will this impact the UK if Brexit proceeds? It will, just like it impacts us here. We're not part of the EU, but the UK, and each of the EU member countries has their own data protection regulations. This regulation is new to harmonize and unify. Those are great words coming from regulators, right? But it applies the same concept. So even if Brexit proceeds, UK is still obligated to protect EU citizen data as you and I are here.
But if I have clients in the UK, they're no longer covered by that?
If you have clients in the UK, they would no longer be EU citizens, assuming Brexit proceeds and all of that completes. However, there are UK requirements as well. Yes? Yeah, no, good question. So this is current, awesome, great example for where the collaboration elements come together. Just some examples of the different considerations across some of these governance teams that we've talked about. Hopefully visually showing and highlighting for you the need for these teams to collaborate, communicate, coordinate on these aspects. So I'm going to start actually on the right side of the slide with the governance piece. The cross-team coordination, definitely key. They're going to pull in legal, they're going to pull in business process. We're going to pull in IT, we're going to pull in HR, everyone across the board. So on an HR note, companies here with EU citizens as associates, where maybe your HR master system is sitting here in the US, absolutely have to address this as well. So some unique considerations, not just client information or service related information, your internal associates also. So the global nature and the cross-border considerations is the extraterritoriality component of the regulation. One of my absolute favorite words, by the way. It's like supercalifragilistic for maybe compliance verbs, but that is truly the application of the regulation across the globe. Oversight and reporting. There will be multiple, I think the last estimate I heard was 30,000 new regulators coming on in the EU to go monitor against what companies are doing to comply with this law. So definitely something they are expecting to actually be regulated, audited, and checked. And a new regulation for organizations to have a data protection officer as well, official new role. Looking at the privacy column, some changes in the regulation, but a lot of them very consistent with what your privacy teams have been considering and addressing all along. Some of the unique components, the right to be forgotten. If I, as an EU citizen, if you have my information and I request that you remove any record that I ever existed in your systems, you have to do that based on the regulation. So this poses some really interesting questions for banking, audit logging, security logging. You have to know where the information is first to go delete it. But then once you delete it, what did that do to the integrity of your information? What did that do to your ability to research, trace potential fraud cases, a lot of different considerations there. So some challenges organizations are working through. Evidencing compliance, vendor oversight, a lot of different integral aspects that extend well beyond the internal organization. And then for all of you, security, last but not least. The regulation indicates that you must implement appropriate organizational and technical measures of your choosing, of course. But those are what will be audited, what needs to be proved for compliance, that they are appropriately securing and protecting that information. Security by design, definitely a requirement as part of the regulation. One of the new challenges in the reg that's been causing a lot of discussion is the breach notification requirement. Excuse me. So you are required to notify the individuals and the regulators within 72 hours of when you become aware of the breach. So that's pretty stringent and comes with some hefty fines for non-compliance. Access components, mapping, security considerations. So different components in each column, but a lot of different aspects that cross considerations need to be coordinated, must work together. So this is just one item that's out there right now, requiring us to continue to collaborate, move forward in that fashion. Wrapping up just a little bit, just through, question?
When they build the wall, does that stop GDPR?
When they build the wall, does that stop GDPR? No. Look at that. I knew I liked this group, I really did when I walked in.
Don't acknowledge him.
So, in closing, happy to answer some questions. One of the teasers in the intro was just there's a few tidbits to take away, questions or ideas to ask or think about back at the office tomorrow. On the collaborative aspect, get together, talk. The auditors, the compliance teams, they might do shots with you, take them out, get together, agree on scope, agree on terminology and definitions, get on the same page as to what you're talking about, where you're moving, the direction you're going. It's not a gotcha game. If your auditors are playing the gotcha game, you need to set them straight, absolutely. Compliance, coming with all of those frameworks, really push them to leverage a shared assessments approach. We found great value and success and efficiency in this. We don't need to test things multiple times, don't need to bug everyone multiple times. There's ways to leverage the common components. Similar commentary for the evidence requests. If your audit and compliance folks are coming asking for things multiple times, challenge them as to why they need it multiple times. What are they doing with it? What's the scope? What is it addressing? Definitely ask questions and challenge. On the closing piece, just recommending that in that collaborative piece, going towards the reporting and the why, focusing on the security, the business growth, those common objectives and alignment is really the goal here in that teamwork and working together. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions, hear comments, but that is what I have to share. Thank you for having me.